What's good, big dogs? Welcome back into the BDGE Dynasty channel. If you're new to the channel, go down and hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss any of the content that we're bringing to you here weekly on the game of Dynasty. Now, what I want to get into today, I've touched on briefly in a previous episode, essentially how in June and July, that can typically be the lull and the low period in your leagues as far as activity goes. Not a lot of trades are going to be happening, and a lot of people are going to look at their teams and kind of see it as complete. They don't think they need to make a trade today because when they look at their roster, it's going to be ready to go basically as the way they see it until the season starts. Now, because that's the case in the large majority of my league, instead of banging my head against the wall and trying to make trades that are unlikely to happen at a frequent rate, what I like to do is kind of start combing over my leagues with a fine-tooth comb. And when I do that, when I take a look at basically how many leagues am I in currently, and in those leagues, I like to really look at my player shares in particular. This time of year, what I want to do is kind of really gauge what players do I have high exposure rates to, and then on the flip side, what players do I have low exposure to, or essentially none at all. Maybe I don't have any shares of certain players. And for the most part, I'm going to have a pretty strong handle on that, and there's going to be a lot of reasons that I can point to as to why I have high exposure or low exposure to certain players. But right now, because it's the dead period and I have some time to really go over this information, I want to make sure that I'm not errant, and I want to look and see, okay, are there some players that I have too much exposure to and I want to trade away a few of those players if I have a chance to, or are those players that I'm extremely bullish on and I'm ready to see really take off in their dynasty value? And then on the flip side, certainly there's going to be some players that I don't really buy into. I think they're overpriced or whatever the case may be in dynasty. And when it comes to players that I basically have zero exposure to or very little exposure to, I just want to make sure that I'm not being too biased and try to take a step back, look at the situation, and just make sure, kind of like Nick says in some of his videos, those aren't going to be players that I regret not having on my team when I fast forward a full calendar year. So let's get into that. I'm basically going to go over with you guys my player shares in the process when I'm taking a look at all my leagues. But before we get into all that, you already know what we got to do. Tuck them damn shirts in. Stop yelling. It's time to eat. All right, so let's get straight into this here. And what I want to do is kind of go over the total number of leagues I'm in and then start yapping about some players that I have a high percentage of in those leagues, as well as some players that I don't have a lot of exposure to. Kind of go through why I'm bullish on some of those players, why I like some of the situations that they're in, and then also on the flip side, some of the players that I'm low on, why I may be out on them because of their current cost, or that I don't necessarily believe in that talent or the situation they're in, as well as some of the players that I probably overlooked or would like to down the road get some more exposure to because I don't have that much, and I do think there's an opportunity for them to be good for a lot of my teams. So as I get through this, go down in the comments and let me know, did you enjoy this format? Do you like this type of a breakdown, and is it helpful for you? And if not, what are some other ideas or videos that you'd prefer me talking about? I really want to give context in some of the videos that I do. I want to make sure that you're thoroughly enjoying and getting actionable information from that. All right, so when I head over to the lab at southarmonff.com, I can see that I'm in a total number of 18 leagues going into this year, and in those 18 leagues, the highest share percentage that I have of someone is in 7 different leagues, and that's 39% of my leagues. So at the wide receiver position, I have one player that I have 7 shares of, and that's Rome Odunze. So someone I'm really bullish on, and I really do like the talent of Rome Odunze. And then at 6 shares, I also have Garrett Wilson and Malik Neighbors. Those are also 2 young receivers that I'm very bullish on as well. And as I kind of get through some of the players that I don't have a lot of exposure to, or some of the ones that I would love to have more exposure to, but just it's unlikely to happen, I think it'll make sense why I have so much exposure to these guys. But where I got a lot of the shares of Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors from in particular was obviously in the rookie draft of this class. The fact that I do have so much exposure to Rome Odunze comes down to the fact that I do really believe in the talent. I think he's a very special receiver at 6'3", 212. You don't see guys typically that big anymore moving the way that Rome Odunze does. He's so big, so fast, and so smooth. I think he's going to be a special player at the next level. And when I combine the fact that I do really believe in the talent, he was given top 10 draft capital and is attached to Caleb Williams, plus the fact that I got him in so many drafts at a very reasonable price. Basically, I got him anywhere from the 105 to the 108 in rookie drafts, and actually in one startup draft at the 502, I drafted the 106 rookie pick, which in turn in that rookie draft turned into Rome Odunze. So I got him at the 105 once, I got him at the 106 4 different times. I got him at the 107 and the 108 in rookie drafts. And the fact that I didn't have to spend higher than a 105 pick on Rome Odunze, the presence of Keenan Allen being there with DJ Moore, we at this point don't really know what he's going to earn as far as targets go in his first season. The presence of Keenan Allen, they just traded a 4th for him. He does only have 1 year left on his deal, but this is a guy that earns an insane amount of targets in his career. Last year, actually on a per game basis, was the NFL leader as far as targets go. And then obviously DJ Moore has shown us the ability to be an alpha, and earn a high amount of targets in his own right. So those two guys' presence, people are not really sure what to expect from Rome Odunze in his rookie season, and that's basically causing a little bit of impatience, even though he has this incredible high draft capital and is attached to Caleb Williams, who a lot of people believe is a special talent at the quarterback position. I don't need him to go out and post an insane year in production in his rookie season. We're going to get into that in a little bit here. And basically when it comes to Malik Neighbors, who's the second person on this list, I have 6 shares of him, so I have him in 33% of my leagues. I just feel like Malik Neighbors, the ceiling that he offers, if he was to hit, is going to be one of the highest ceiling wide receivers in the game. And because Dynasty right now is so crazed and focused on the wide receiver position, Malik Neighbors offers that crazy high ceiling to get into the range of guys like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb a little bit differently than Rome Odunze. Basically, it comes down to the situation with Malik Neighbors. People don't really believe in the quarterback of Daniel Jones, whoever's going to be throwing the ball to Malik Neighbors, and they're worried about that really capping his ceiling. But when it comes to production, again, I don't really need Malik Neighbors to go out there and post a top 12 season. I really do think Malik Neighbors could end up being a top 12 receiver this year, probably on the higher range of outcomes for him, but I don't need that to happen for his dynasty value to stay extremely high because of how talented he is. Being attached to top 10 draft capital, people are going to make excuses for him, very similar to what we've seen with other wide receivers, which we're going to get into here in a minute. The fact that the Giants invested the 6th overall pick into Malik Neighbors, I think they're going to force feed him targets, and the amount of targets that he's likely to earn is going to make his dynasty value just fine. And basically the only real difference between Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze in the way that I'm viewing it is the cost of acquisition. I did prefer Malik to Rome. I believe they're a little bit different as far as the style of play that they have, but I think both of these guys offer elite ceilings at the receiver position, and I'm really excited to get both of them on this many of my teams. With Garrett Wilson, it was pretty similar as far as cost of acquisition, but he's obviously in a much different situation than those two going into year 3. In those 6 shares, I was able to get Garrett Wilson at the 106, and then I was also able to get him at the 108 in one of those rookie drafts in 2022. And the other 3, I got him in startups. So in that 2022 season when he was a rookie, I got him at the 612 and at the 705. And then in one of the startups that I was in last year, I got him at the 311 in that league. Now that was the cost of acquisition for how I got those shares of Garrett Wilson as well as Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze. I'm not going to talk your ear off too much here about Garrett Wilson, as earlier in the week, Nick already went over Garrett Wilson and the reason that he's so high on him and basically will not trade him. And he basically in the dynasty leagues that he's in isn't going to move Garrett Wilson to you. It's not going to happen as far as trading goes. And guess what, Nick? I got him in Fade the Fetal. You might as well apply that same principle and same rule to me. Now after talking about Garrett Wilson, he's kind of a really nice pivot point to talk about the way that I'm viewing all 3 of these players in their dynasty value and kind of pairing them and grouping them together, something that we went over in detail over at South Harmon with several different podcasts in this topic in particular. So if you were taking a look at a ton of NFL data as far as it goes with draft capital, and you just use the first round and you went back several years as far as drafts go, that first round hit rate is going to look pretty convoluted. But if you do narrow it down to a much more recent sample size, use the last 5 years, and you talk about it not just in the first round, you kind of form what we call the S tier. Basically, if you have top 10 draft capital, if you look at from 2019 to 2023, the wide receivers that were taken inside the top 10 over that time, in 2019, there was none. 2020, there also was none. When you get to the 21 draft, though, you got Jamar Chase as the 5th overall pick, Jalen Waddle as the 6th overall pick, and then Devontae Smith at pick 10. And then in the 2022 draft, you had at pick 8 Drake London and pick 10 Garrett Wilson. Just outside of that is Chris Olave. But for the sake of argument, we kept this list to the top 10 picks, making that the S tier, which then in 2023, obviously, we didn't have any picks inside the top 10. JSN was the first pick off the board. He didn't go until the 20s. And then this year, we had, again, just like 2021, 3 receivers that came off the board inside the top 10. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and then Rome Odunze. Obviously, we don't have the production from these rookies and what they're going to be doing in the future. Can't see that far ahead. But when you go back and look at the guys that make this list in the 2021 season and 2022 season, as far as where their dynasty value stands, as well as what they've actually put on wax, what their production has been. Let's take a look at this list. Jamar Chase right now on Keep Trade Cut is the wide receiver 3. And over the first 3 years of his career, his finishes have been wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, and wide receiver 12 when it comes to finishes in points per game over that time. Now, in the case of Jalen Waddle on Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 12 currently, and in his first 3 seasons, he was wide receiver 14, wide receiver 13, and wide receiver 21 in points per game. And then currently the lowest of these 3 receivers in the 21 class as far as dynasty value goes, just outside the top 15, wide receiver 16 on Keep Trade Cut. Devontae Smith in his rookie season was wide receiver 43 in points per game, but then followed those up with his second and third year with much better finishes, wide receiver 14 and wide receiver 22 in points per game. But this is where it really gets interesting. When you take a look at this 2022 class, the talents of Drake London and Garrett Garrett Wilson, Drake Leonard the 8th overall pick, Garrett Wilson the 10th overall pick. Garrett Wilson currently wide receiver 7 on Keep Trade Cut, and then Drake London not far behind him, wide receiver 11 on Keep Trade Cut. But when you take a look at what these guys have done in points per game as far as production goes in their first 2 years, Garrett Wilson wide receiver 31 and 33 as far as points per game goes in PPR leagues, and then Drake London even further down the board, wide receiver 47 in his rookie season, and then last year wide receiver 44. Both of those are in PPR leagues and in points per game, not overall finish. Now do with that information what you will, but for me, when I take a look at this and I really start to digest and think about it, Marv, Malik, and Rome, for me from the beginning when I took a look at their game, they were in a far separate group for me than other receivers in this class. Not to be dismissive to Brian Thomas Jr. and other receivers and talents in this class, they're just nowhere near in that same elite tier. When I take a look at Matt Harmon over at Reception Perception, at this point he's kind of one of the gold standards as far as really taking a look at these college players and evaluating them. He has all three of those receivers in the very elite tier of all the receivers that he's graded from 2021 to 2024. Basically, you're going to be looking at the guys that I talked about in the S tier and add in Chris Olave, who was drafted 11. The top 9 receivers are the guys in the S tier and Chris Olave for him as well. And the point that I'm making here is when you take a look at their game, what type of talent profile they have and the elite upside, combine that with the fact that they all have really high draft capital. And when you look at that 5-year smaller sample size, these are going to be receivers that have value retention for the next 2 seasons unless they absolutely fall on their face. And then if they do happen to hit, really start to put production out there where they're back-end wide receiver ones, take a look at a guy like Jalen Waddle, who honestly is only wide receiver 12 realistically because of the presence of Tyreek Hill in front of him. And then you take a look at a guy like Jamar Chase. If any one of these 3 receivers comes out of the gates early, gives you that wide receiver 5 to 10 finish realistically where they're meaningful and impacting teams and winning fantasy championships for you, the sky is the limit as far as where they can go. And realistically, getting into the next group of people, guys that I would love to have more exposure to. The reason I have so much exposure to these guys, I think if they do start to become elite difference makers, they can get very close in conversation to guys like CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. And 2 of the guys that I would love to have more exposure to are Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. At this point, the way that wide receivers are valued in Dynasty and the cost is far too much to send away, or there really isn't even a cost that you can send, they're completely unattainable. Now, there are some other receivers much further down the board than Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson that I don't have actually any exposure to. The 3 receivers that meet this list are Jalen Waddle, Tank Dell, and Deebo Samuel. It's a little different as far as why I don't have exposure to each one of these 3 players. When it comes to Jalen Waddle, I think he actually is a very talented wide receiver, but when I take a look at the numbers the last 2 seasons, basically since the presence of Tyreek Hill has been here, when I take a look at some of the advanced metrics for him, nothing really pops off the page and makes me super excited for him being one of these elite difference makers at the receiver position in the next few years. And when I take a look at what Tyreek Hill has done, the fact that I think he still is an elite talent, he's just built different. He's so damn fast, so damn elusive. And when you take a look at the advanced metrics for Tyreek Hill, they are very much different, and it clearly shows to me that he is the alpha, and the expected fantasy points for him are in a far different tier. So until the presence of Tyreek Hill is gone, whether that's an injury to Tyreek Hill or he actually does walk away from the game, let's say in 2 years like he's talked about, I'm not actually sure that we're going to see this Jalen Waddle that could be a top 5 to 7 type finisher at the position really unleashed. And it's not that I don't think that he's talented enough to do that, I just don't think the situation right now warrants it. And basically when I start to factor in the way that I really view Jalen Waddle and what he's going to give me in production, combined with what it costs to attain him. For example, in startups, a lot of times I'd prefer to draft guys going in similar ranges than I would Jalen Waddle in that late 3rd, early 4th. And then when it comes to Jalen Waddle on the open market, in the few times that I was able to acquire Jalen Waddle, often I'm able to trade him away for a better package that I prefer on my team than actually holding Jalen Waddle. And that's really the reason that I don't have any shares. I just want to show you here quickly an example of what I mean as far as really basically flipping Jalen Waddle. Here I was able to send away Jordan Addison, Josh Oliver in a 5th and get back Jalen Waddle in a 2nd. For me, that was a no-brainer. And then I was able to take Jalen Waddle, attach a different 2nd round pick to him, and get back Jaden Reed and Kyle Pitts. Now, obviously, I have Jalen Waddle in a much separate tier than Jaden Reed, but realistically, from the production standpoint, I'm tearing down from Jalen Waddle to Jaden Reed, but I'm getting Kyle Pitts for a 2nd round pick. With the quarterback upgrade that Kyle Pitts is getting, there's no way that I should be able to get him for a 2nd round pick. Then you got a guy like Tank Dell, and I think the case with Tank Dell is extremely interesting. Obviously, someone that was drafted extremely late in rookie drafts, anywhere from the 4th to 5th round. Some people even got him on waivers last year, but for the most part, I really haven't been given offers or find anywhere that I'm able to attain Tank Dell without sending away at least a future 1st round pick. And it's not that I don't think Tank Dell's a special player or could be worth a 1st round pick, but I think think the range of outcomes for him are pretty wide, and for me it's just a little too risky to invest all that into Tank Dell right now. Not saying that it couldn't be the right play, but the way that I typically approach my teams and the way that I like to trade, for me he's someone that I'm just not going to be able to attain at a price that's palatable. And when it comes to Waddle, Tank Dell, and Deebo Samuel, I certainly acknowledge that I could look back at this time next year and be missing out as far as the high upside that each one of those guys possesses. But for the most part, what it's going to cost to acquire these guys in most of my leagues is going to be pretty rich, and I'm not really necessarily going to be able to have exposure to every single player. But what I'm trying to do when going over this information is acknowledge, are there some players far enough down the board as far as value goes that might actually be attainable at a reasonable price, and that could end up helping my contending teams especially really go ahead and secure a title. And when I think about it from that lens, as I get down the board further, there are two older receivers that right now at this time of year, I do want to see if I can get on a few more of my Dynasty teams. Right now I have Amari Cooper on one of my teams and Mike Evans on one of my teams. Both of these guys are starting to get a little older, and certainly the age apex is coming where they could fall off a cliff. But with what they could end up giving my team as far as production goes for the next year or two, I really want to see if I'm able to get Amari Cooper and Mike Evans on at least 2 or 3 more of my teams over the next few weeks. And basically, I'm trying to make sure I don't have too many blind spots and there aren't situations that I'm overlooking that are actually attainable when it comes to Dynasty. And it's really helped me pinpoint that I should try to get a little more exposure to Amari Cooper and Mike Evans. And that's basically the way that I'm looking at my teams currently as far as player exposure at the wide receiver position. Now, when I'm taking a look at my leagues and I pivot over to the quarterback position, there is one player in particular that really pops off the page. I have 6 shares of Anthony Richardson. So again, I have him in 33% of my leagues. And the reason I have so much exposure to him, I really do believe that Anthony Richardson offers more upside than any quarterback that we've ever seen play the position. Certainly the floor is not necessarily that safe, especially with the style of play he has, the fact that he's coming off of the shoulder injury, and he's probably going to be putting himself in harm's way with the style of play. And I want to get into that a little further, but when I take a look at the quarterback position overall, there wasn't really anything glaring. I have several quarterbacks that I have on 3 of my teams: Patrick Mahomes, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, Tua Tagovailoa, Deshaun Watson. I basically have a pretty healthy blend of a lot of different quarterbacks across my leagues. There wasn't anything when I took a look at the quarterback position in particular that really stood out to me and was a glaring hole that I needed to fix. One thing that I do see, I don't actually have any shares of Joe Burrow. One of the things with Joe Burrow is obviously he is viewed in that elite tier as far as the quarterbacks go, and the cost of acquisition for him is really high. One of the things I'm going to do though, seeing this, is I would definitely like to get 1 or 2 shares of him. So I'm probably going to see if I could pivot 1 share of Anthony Richardson into Joe Burrow, or see if I was able to down tier Patrick Mahomes in one of those 3 leagues that I have him in, and maybe seeing if I could go from Patrick Mahomes and tiering down to get Joe Burrow plus in the 3 leagues that I have Mahomes. Those are some things that I'm going to try to do here in the next week or two to see if I can at least get Joe Burrow on a couple of my teams in Dynasty. Now, the reason I have so much exposure to Anthony Richardson is I believe he's the biggest lottery ticket at the quarterback position that we've ever seen. And he is such a freak athlete, and what he can offer you as far as a Konami cheat code is just simply unheard of and something we've never seen at the quarterback position. Obviously, everybody knows he's very athletic, and what he did at the NFL Combine kind of put the world on notice last year. Last year at the NFL Combine, Anthony Richardson ran a 4.43 at the quarterback position, one of the fastest 40 times we've ever seen that took place at the NFL Combine. 40-yard dashes at pro days are hand time. They're at places that people are comfortable, and they're not everybody doing it at the same venue. When you filter out any 40-yard dashes that took place at a pro day, and you just talk about what happened at the NFL Combine, there's been 3 quarterbacks in NFL history to run a faster 40 time than Anthony Richardson. Michael Vick was actually the only quarterback ever to run a sub 4.4. RG3 ran a 4.41, and then Reggie McNeil ran a 4.40. Before all these injuries took place to RG3 and really derailed his career, we saw what he offered as far as being extremely dynamic in the rushing department, and you obviously don't need me to tell you how ridiculously athletic and dynamic Michael Vick was. But then when you account for the size of these 3 guys, factoring that in, Michael Vick was 6 foot 210, RG3 was 6'2", 223. Anthony Richardson, a completely different animal, 6'4", 244 pounds. And basically taking all that into account and really thinking about that, instead of filtering this information out by the quarterback position, what he's technically categorized as, so this time instead of filtering it out by the quarterback position, what you're looking at here, this time it's by weight class, so you got to be at least 244 pounds to make this list. And when you take a look at the 40-yard dashes that have been run in the range of this 4.43 that Anthony Richardson did while being 244 pounds, and when you take a look at this list, Vernon Davis, Micah Parsons, Montez Sweat, Bruce Irvin, Von Miller, what I'm really trying to show you here, Anthony Richardson, as far as an athlete goes, is in the same category as some of the absolute freak shows of the NFL. Some of the most insanely athletic edge rushers, linebackers, and tight ends that the game has to offer. Anthony Richardson is in that type of category. And when you think about all of that, Anthony Richardson is one of the biggest and most dynamic athletes in the NFL that just so happens to be playing the quarterback position, and what he can offer on the ground. With that 4.43 speed, this is a guy that we saw at Florida run away from all the SEC defenders in that game versus LSU, an 81-yard run to the house. We didn't have a chance in that really small sample size to see A-Rich pop one of these long ones. But A-Rich not only can take basically any run to the house, which is going to put him in the category of only a few people, guys like Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, a very short list, but he not only offers that home run ability, this is a guy that at 244 pounds, that's more than Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. And both of those guys last year, playing at less than 244, led the NFL at the quarterback position with rushing touchdowns at 15 apiece. And that actually ties the NFL record. 15 rushing touchdowns is the most that we've ever seen from a quarterback in a single season. Last year, in 4 games, 2 of which Anthony Richardson left extremely early with a concussion and then unfortunately that shoulder injury that he had that ended his season. In those 4 games, A-Rich had 4 total rushing touchdowns. In the way that the Colts are going to be utilizing Anthony Richardson around the goal line, this is a guy that easily has the ability to give you double-digit touchdowns like a Josh Allen and like a Jalen Hurts, but both of those guys don't offer that same home run ability that Anthony Richardson does. When you think about the upside A-Rich possesses in the red zone around the goal line to give you double-digit touchdowns, Anthony Richardson can absolutely be the first quarterback that we've seen go for over 1,000 rushing yards while also posting double-digit touchdowns on the ground. And the combination of that is absolutely deadly and something we've never seen from the quarterback position. And for fantasy purposes, that makes his upside pretty much unmatched, and that is really why I have so much exposure to Anthony Richardson. So that's all I got as far as the wide receivers and the quarterbacks go. Talking about some of the players that I have a whole lot of exposure to and I'm pretty bullish on, or on the flip side, some of the players that I'm just out on, or after looking at all this information, would like to go ahead and try to see if I could get on a few more of my dynasty teams. Let me know what you thought of this concept and of this video, and if you want to see me go over the running back and the tight end position, I got some really interesting stuff to talk about and how this really helped me at the running back position in particular. This really kind of helped me figure out a plan of attack across all my leagues. Let me know what you thought of this video, of the format. Did you like it? Did it help you out at all? And if you want me to go over the running back and tight end position next week, or if you want me to cover something else, let me know all that in the comments. I'll see you back here, same time, same place, talking more dynasty strategy and trades. I'm out of this thing. Peace.